implementation and is at $13.6 million. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is the financial assessment for Saipan. Again, this was looking at, and this is just considering, this is the cash flow and net present value. But this is only considering the CUC making this large capital expense, for each phase, right? So for 2025, they're making that large capital investment, and also shown in 2030. That may not be the case. We're looking at different options or different sensitivities, is what they call it, to show graphically if, for example, if they were to have an IPP, an independent power provider, the graph might look a little different, right? Because we're not making that large capital expense at year 2020 or 2030. It's actually going to be spread out throughout the 20 years or whatever the agreement is. But the net present value, we're looking at negative 86 million with the solar. If it was business as usual with just the power generators or diesel generators, we're looking at negative $202 million. And again, right, the cost, it's just the cost of producing power is really expensive. Right, but you kind of see that uptick and trend upwards by 2044. Okay, next slide, please. For Tinian, we're looking at a large capital expenditure, right? In 2025, that's for solar and BESS, a little over $30 million. And then, and then it starts to trend upward up at 2044. The net present value is negative 31 million versus if it was business as usual, it would be negative 128 million. Okay, next slide. Okay, so for ROTA financial assessment, it's showing up as a downward trend because as discussed previously, the solar PV system size and further assessment is required to see if more land can take up more or a larger system. And then also minimal growth is modeled at for ROTA, and there were no large projects presented at the time. There's simply not enough load to bring in the revenue, right, to make up for this investment. But with that said, your net present value with the solar, right, is negative 46 million, and then business as usual is negative 80 million. Okay. Next slide. Another task is SCADA staffing and skills assessment. So SCADA staffing and skills assessment, essentially what we're looking at is a desktop assessment of a CUC staffing skill set to bring on SCADA and also solar, a solar system. With solar, I think we're aiming towards having an IPP, so just having maybe a grid controller is going to be what's kind of important to incorporate that. But to incorporate SCADA, we're assessing and evaluating CUC's current infrastructure, their capabilities, defining the infrastructure, and then basically mapping out a skills matrix for the CUC to implement it in the future. Next slide. Okay. Again, after thorough review, the general findings and recommendations for the CUC can be broadly separated in two categories. We have foundation and also infrastructure. So foundation, right, looking at a grid controller implementation, network protocols and controls and communication, SCADA software development, testing, commissioning, and documentation, and requirements of new assets, whether it's solar and BESS, based on whether they're manned or unmanned or just controlled. And then you have the infrastructure, a grid controller for unified control across the network and assets, fiber optic infrastructure, so improving on that, wireless networks for redundancy, so you have fiber optic and wireless networks, central control location, right, for your grid controller, and then inventory of monitoring and control capabilities for existing assets. Next slide. Okay, so summary and future work. So CUC has aggressively increased the renewable energy goals. Techno-economic modeling has shown that the islands in the CNMI are in good position to offset expensive costs of diesel energy with large-scale solar PV and BESS. So for Saipan, we were looking at 60 megawatts. Again, this is at by 2030. So 60 megawatts of solar, 48 megawatts of BESS. For Tinian, we are looking at 8 megawatts of solar and 3 megawatts of BESS, and Rhoda, 3 megawatts of solar and 2 megawatts of BESS, all before 2030. Next slide. Okay, short term, within 6 months. So for the CUC to develop an RFP, a request for proposals to engage IPPs, install capacity, and for the years of installation. So that needs to be negotiated and put in the RFP. Solicit an invitation for bid. One more workshop, which we essentially gather most of the comments, and then we present the final IRP to the board, and then releasing the IRP for public comment, developing a grid controller philosophy, and developing SCADA skills and resourcing, further staging development as needed, and then network upgrades to be in line with the new solar and BESS to come online. That's all I had. This is our condensed version of our presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Tenorio. And once again, I would like to just remind the members that we, as much as possible, ask questions only on power generation. I forgot to mention that we're not discussing water or sewer this meeting, but also stay within the context of the presentation, and in this case, the matters regarding the IRP. This time, I recognize the Senator Castro.
Morning, Mr. Tenorio, Board Chair, Executive Directors, and Board members. Regarding the presentation earlier, I wanted to find out if this plan incorporated lessons learned from our neighboring island of Guam and also the state of Hawaii. As you may know, Hawaii is one of the leaders in renewable energy in the nation right now. The island of Kauai is almost at 100% renewable, all solar PV and battery storage. From the presentation, I did notice two concerns. One is the fact that it's a solar farm, centralized, connected to the grid. In Hawaii, what they learned was that due to limited land, right, because it's really expensive in Hawaii, they looked more at microgrids and rooftop solar, and they were able to achieve more rapidly get closer to that 100% renewable mark. So in the plan, I didn't see that factor. In addition, a lot of the solar farms mentioned are near the airport. And especially with the military buildup on Tinian, if you have a concentrated number of panels, that might have a problem with the airplanes landing, which is a problem in Arizona at one of their military bases. And then, in addition, I was able to visit several solar PVs in Hawaii and Guam farms, and was really impressed with the Mangilau station also, just because just that farm alone would be able to supply Saipan and maybe even Tinian. It was interesting to see from the presentation that Rhoda was kind of put on the back burner a little bit, but um, costs over there are really high. So I think we may want to look at that, um, and maybe prioritize and use Rhoda as an example of the possibility. I'm a little concerned with the fact that it's only 40% is our goal. Um, our economy is based on energy. So a lot of investors, they don't want to invest here if power is so expensive. And it comes down to imports versus exports. And it may cost a lot in the beginning, but if it's going to flatline, um, if we put in that investment into solar PVs, and I myself, I had to practice what I preach. So I installed solar on my house. I traded in my car because on a legislator's salary we don't make much, but I traded my car for a solar PV system. I don't have battery because I can't afford that right now, but I will get there. But even with just the solar panels, I was able to drop my CUC bill in half. Um, we have to look at CUC as not like this major for-profit. At the end of the day, CUC serves the public, and the more smart investments we make, the better it's going to be for our public. And we have a lot of highly capable personnel and board members, and I really hope, board members, that we tap into our personnel, our linemen especially, send them off to training so they can see these types of technology, and not just base everything on the US. Because, for example, World Resort used to be owned by Hanwha Group. Hanwha Group is one of the biggest companies in Korea that manufactures things like solar batteries and renewables. So just like something as simple as our riding mowers when we mow our lawn, we can buy the US belts, but it's like $200, or we can buy the Korean belts, which is like $20. So the closer we get to our supply chain, maybe we can improve our costs. So thank you for your time.
Is that Senator? Were you expecting a response, or is that a question? I'm sorry, I stepped out. So
No, it was just a comment,
Okay.
and just based on the presentation and the concerns that I saw. But thank you.
okay, thank you, Senator. Any other Senator Magofnia? Recognize.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome again, our Chairwoman Janice, to our Executive Director Kevin, and GHD, and the board members of CUC. Welcome. Before I start, I just would like to clarify with GHD. So today's presentation was based on data that was collected back in 2023. Okay. And so my only question to your presentation, by the way, is it's very informative. Lots of information to digest. I'm not going to say that I understood every single slide that you had on there, because it takes time to understand, what it is that you're presenting. I'm not an expert in utilities in any way, so I'm going to have to do some homework and research the presentation a little bit more. But I just wanted to know that because these were data collected from 2023, it's a little bit over a year now since that data has been collected. And I wanted to know that based on your presentation, has there any significant changes to the assumptions or the assessment or calculations of how you came about with your recommendation to affect the recommendation, basically? Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding the data, so the data that we collected, I think, was through 2022, but we received that in April of 2023, and we submitted our draft IRP. When one of the comments from CUC was to use the latest data, but we just need that data, and I think we have it. We just got it actually yesterday, so we'll review some of that and see how that affects and what the trends were. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that update. And I was just curious because part of the assessment for your forecast, right, is based on the population growth and what the projection growth is. And I'm sure that the population has changed quite a bit from 2022 to where it is now. And so that's the reason why I asked that question. Also, with our commercial accounts, with a lot of businesses closing down again, that has an impact on the projection that you have, right? So I just wanted to know, because these were data collected from a year or so ago, if there were any major changes that you would need to make to your recommendation. But aside from that, thank you for the presentation. I yield, Chair.
This was mostly Senator Magufnia. This time, the chair recognizes Senator Frank Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, when you mention on the Tinian financial assessment, when you mention about business as usual, 128 million negative, that's up to 2040. Is it this data was collected from what year? Because we have a lot of activities going on in Tinian. Is this an accurate assessment of?
I think that the assessment with the business as usual doesn't really display it, but it's basically the cost of producing the energy versus just because it costs a lot versus the revenue that they're getting back
So,
for the rate.
So expenses versus collection.
Um,
You're collecting less than spending, so it's negative 128.
yeah, that's what it's showing based on
up
that.
to 20. This is the
2040,
like
2044.
2040.
Yeah.
So that new information you gather, what year did you gather? Is it
I think the
including
data
the activity that's going on right now?
no, so the data we collected was up through 2022.
Okay, so up
So-
to 22. So you just
Yeah.
like projecting up to 2040 that it will be negative 128.
Yes, that's what it shows with the business as usual.
Thank you. Just to clarify, just make sure that I understand. I'm
Yeah.
following your.
I had to
Percentage.
speak
Thank
with
you.
my financial advisors as well, but that's basically what it is with because we had to look at different options, not options, but different categories and try to blend it. So we looked at commercial, residential, and then also
So in
government.
in this regards, I hope that because if going to be a negative, I hope it's not gonna like what Mr. Tenorio just mentioned about helping the general public.
Yeah.
I hope it's not gonna rise rapidly and put the burden on the general public because of the negative. I'm worried about the negative situation here. So, and I appreciate Senator Castro for sharing with us what he had gathered information as to try and see how CUC can do to mitigate some of the hardship that our general public is encountering right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I can answer further on the financial impact. Our plan, and we will be showing that in the next presentation, we plan on having a smoother impact to help our customers. And we have a couple different options that we're looking at to achieve that goal.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Thank you, Director Watson. Any other member with regards to item 1? Senator, recognize Vice Senator Ron Calvo.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, board members and all, and Mr. Tenorio for the presentation. I just wanted to go back to the initial slide where, the intro, where it says the IRP plan, how it said most recent iteration. This is on page 3, 2016 CUC IRP. And then you stated the data came in from 20. So if it was established 2016, and we're at 2025. I was doing the math. That's like a 9-year difference, in regards from then to now. Do we have any percentage at all in regards to the transition or the introduction to renewable or other sources other than dependency on our diesel fuel currently at this time?
Just to clarify, so we're providing a update to the 2016 CUC IRP,
Okay.
and I'm not sure if the 2016 IRP was adopted. I think it was never adopted. So that's the update we're providing. But then the data, again, is up to 2022. So
So from
It-
2016 to 2022?
yeah, and I
Or
think we had older data, but primarily 2016
Okay.
to 2022. But that's a unique period, right? Because we
Yes,
had
yes.
a devastating typhoon 2018, and we had COVID-19.
Okay. So that's
Pandemic,
probably a
so-
factor involved
Yes,
also.
definitely.
So if we're going to go towards 40% renewable energy, what can you state now for the public? Where are we at currently on this IRP plan? Because I notice do we have anything as far as now with solar in place under CUC?
I think that question that needs to be answered by the management. And it's open. The senator's question
Like in
is
transition, not, to
We
promote.
do, GHD's actually won the bid for the 20 megawatt solar farm and battery storage, which is near the airport. It's under design. They're about 40 to 50% complete with the design to be completed by April, mid to late April. And then that portion will be set to go out for an IPP for a public-private partnership.
And if I may add, so what we're developing are bridging documents and concept designs for a IPP, right? To place a bid, and eventually they would finalize their layout and then provide construct as per their plan. But then with regards to solar, that's the only thing that CUC has other than residential rooftop solar, which is not considered an asset to the CUC.
Okay, thank you. Another quick question. I'm just going down I know on the CUC webpage, because I see a discrepancy. I know just regarding the capacity of our power plants. We have Saipan on the website, electric power generation. Saipan has 36 megawatt capacity. Reserves are at 8 megawatt. Can you share that a little bit for someone new like me, knowing that it's right here on the placement, but on your website? And then Tinian 20 megawatt, and then reserves 18.5.
Senator
Yeah.
Vice. Can I just respectfully ask that we reserve that
Oh, that's
commentary
the
for
other-
item 2, and we just kind of stay in the
Okay.
context of the item 1.
Mhm.
Is there any other with regards to the presentation by Mr. Tenorio?
Probably will. Chair, I'll yield.
Okay, thank you, Vice. This time, we'll recognize the Senate President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So mine is just more on the technical part. I'm looking at the legislation that. What's the legislation that you guys are following in terms of renewable energy? What are we trying to get at? Because if I'm looking at this legislation, it's telling us that if it's correct, 1862, 20% by 2016. Is that correct? Is that what you guys are tracking in terms of renewable energy? And I'm just going to add to this. And the reason why I'm asking this question is that here's the plan. and I see that you guys are working hard. So maybe if it's a 2016 deadline, maybe it's time for the legislature and the board members to sit down and kind of amend this legislation and get it up to date. Because in terms of the legislation that we're looking at, CUC is far behind. So that's why I just asked that question. I see that you guys are working on the IRP and you guys have the plans to transition. However, it's 2025. So if 2016 was the hit, then we're far behind. So maybe this is the time for CUC and the legislature to sit down and amend this. I think it's something as simple as just amending it. So thank you. I yield for now.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a couple questions, Mr. Tenorio, and I want to refer to your slide on the area where you presented the street light. I mean the traffic light. Can you go back to that? And not necessarily for me personally, but for the viewing public, can you restate what that represents? And I'm assuming, based on what you presented, is that that's the options that are feasible to deploy here in the CNMI. Green meaning favorable, red meaning absolutely not, almost, yellow meaning maybe. And yeah, I'll just throw the presentation back to you.
Thank you. So the green meaning it's a go. The red options were just deemed not feasible and eliminated from consideration. Especially for the islands, right? Like onshore wind and offshore wind. Some of the considerations were also typhoons.
Mm-hmm.
You would need a system that would be able to retract down.
Sure.
A gas plant, local resource viability. Again, this gas plant they're considering is natural gas.
So sorry to interrupt. So in a nutshell, large scale solar PV and large scale battery is the option
Correct.
that we're tracking here.
Correct. And those were the two options that we essentially looked at and try to optimize in our study.
Okay, so just from a layman's perspective, for example, my demand is 3 megawatt, and we're at 40% objective with regards to renewable energy or alternative energy. Can that be 100% because of the demand that I have, or does it represent a 2 megawatt demand? 40% of that is to be renewable energy, or can you just call energy?
So
For the sake of the view, to have a fossil fuel power generator. Can you just articulate on that, please?
yes. So also just to clarify, so it's 40% by 2030 is what the
Sure. Yeah, I'm just kind of jumping
and
ahead.
then-
So
and then the solar panels, right? When we're looking at SIPAN, our target is again 40% penetration. But when we say 60 megawatts, these panels aren't. I mean, you're providing a 60 megawatt farm, but the efficiency is maybe like 30%. Right.
Okay.
So it'll come down. So the actual power megawatt usage is
yes,
30%. It's
and,
less.
and I'm glad you mentioned that, because when we us here, the consumers, when we hear the SMEs, subject matter experts, talk about that, we immediately say, okay, out of 10 cents, 44 cents is going to renewable energy. That's the easiest way for us to explain it and one to understand it. So I respectfully ask the management, the board, and your consultants that should this come to a fruition as we near the transition, however we're going to get there, that this thing has to be clarified carefully to the ratepayers, so that we can be able to ask the proper question, if there is a question with their billing and the like. So just a thought. I know this is a presentation of the IRP, but so I'm gonna stick with the one more question, and then we'll move forward. And maybe I'm going to break my own rule here to stick with the topic, but maybe it's an open-ended question, because I think this is something that in the item number 2 can just web into incorporate it. But you don't have to answer, Mr. Tenoro, because I want to be fair. But is there something, Mr. Watson, to allow us? How is this going to be integrated into the grid right now, and to what extent does the consumer have to be educated with regards to, especially the famous FAC? How is this going to affect that? Because the FAC, I think, stands for fuel, no? So if I don't know if the solar panel has that capability or requirement, but I'll reserve that. I'm just kind of, along that line. So unless any member have a second go around with the slide, I'm going to move to item 2. Oh, Um, Senator Magofnia?
Thank you, Chair. Not really a question on the slide. I wanted to point it out that as Mr. Tenorio was explaining something on the slide right here, I noticed that Board Simon Sanchez was nodding his head in disagreement, and I wanted to ask him if there was something that he wanted to share.
Please come up. Sorry, Chair. But
Thank you,
Okay.
Chair. Are you?
no, I think he's agreeing. Okay. Go ahead, Senator Simon Sanchez.
Buenas, Senators, and Sujus Masi for allowing us to come before you and present to you, frankly, what I think is a good plan. And we're going in the right direction. We are a little bit behind, but the lessons that we have learned in Guam, 100 miles to the south, we all have 2 eyes, 2 ears, hearts and brains and legs, and there's no reason that the CNMI cannot duplicate the progress that we're making in Guam to move away from using as much fossil fuel as we are currently using, and to use renewables and conventional. I'm not a boat owner, but every boat owners in the CNMI in Guam have always told me, you never go out with one engine. And in Guam, we are blending both conventional generation, but much more fuel efficient, with renewables. Now, we have a little more land in Guam, but we find that utility scale solar benefits those ratepayers that cannot put a solar array on their roof. In fact, utility scale solar is the only renewable they're going to get because, like here, the houses, some of them are older, not all of them are concrete. Think about apartment buildings. You can't put a solar array on a 20-unit apartment building. Not easily, right? So there is a place, I believe, and the study sustains that, for some utility scale solar in the 3 islands here, particularly. And what I like about it is the scale is small. We're not doing 60 megs like in Manilao, right? And it's a beautiful facility, but it's 250 acres. Now we don't have an easy 250 acres in the 3 islands here, right? But we're not asking for 60 megs in the GHD plan and the plan that Kevin and Betty are developing. These are much smaller scale. So to me, bite-sized pieces, very doable. Frankly, and many of the bidders on Guam. So Guam is about to award another 300 megawatts of solar. And our new generator that we're building now that will open in September, and it's taken years. It didn't happen overnight, but we finally are going to get it open. When we put the solar we already have on, the new generator we're turning on in September. We're testing now. We got it up to 45 megawatts yesterday. We're getting very excited. The baby's coming. All right, it's going to be a beautiful baby. All right, and the solar farms we're about to award, we're going to go from 3 million barrels a year of fuel to 1 million barrels a year in 3 years. Now that's 2028. To get to 40% in 2030, to me, is very doable, right? And to answer your simple question, if your demand is 3 megs and we're giving you 3 megs, today we're giving it to you 100% carbon oil, right? 40% renewables would mean we would be able to get 1.2 megawatts of your 3 megawatts provided by a renewable source. And for now, solar, we're at 14 degrees north latitude Guam, when we're 15 degrees here. We are perfect for solar. Right? Other than the fact that we're partly cloudy, you have the intermittency, not like Arizona. So batteries help us with intermittency, But now the whole revolution of batteries, right, is to take the energy we were making today, right now, from a solar farm or a solar rooftop, put it in a battery, but don't distribute it yet. Tonight, when everybody goes home, and someday all the tourists go back to the hotel and peak demand climbs, right now, they turn on a generator. In the future, we want to take a battery that has stored cheaper solar energy made at noon and dispatch it when people start coming home from 6 to 8, so we don't turn on a generator or we don't run it as heavily, right? And we take the savings in fuel to pay for the solar farm and still reduce the power bill for Tan Maria and Tun Jose and have a more reliable system. That's the process we are implementing in Guam. I believe we are on our way to implement it here. They are learning good lessons, and we've provided them all the contracts that we've awarded, all the RFPs that we've issued. They've got all the paperwork. Now we have to fit it into CNMI law. It's a little different in Guam. In Guam, the partner goes and gets the land. We're going to need your help to get public lands or deal with the fact that land tenureship is different here, right? But to the degree we can work together and find the right sites in the right places, deal with some of these issues about, is this the right place because it's next to the airport? I'm not familiar with all those details, but I trust you to help us figure out the right place to put it. But I think utility scale solar will fit into here, and it will be a hedge against oil, and it'll begin to reduce the amount of barrels of oil that we use here to provide the same amount of energy, and it'll do it more reliably, and it will bring down the total cost of the bill. I was looking at, you had all that net present value and the savings, and I just did a quick math about it. But if we do business as usual over the next 2044, our negative cash flow is $364 million. If we do what GHD is suggesting we do, and take it all with a grain of salt, these are projections, right? We save almost $247 million of that 364 if we do nothing. So that's this whole logic of do nothing. The cost to our community, net present value, is an additional 364. If we do something, we can knock that off by almost 250 million. You still got to pay for the solar farm and the people to run it, but we're finding in Guam that we're getting excellent bids and at much lower prices. We're getting the 300 megs we're awarding now is 17.9 cents a kilowatt hour. We just dropped our LEAC, our FAC to 20. Here we've ranged from 21 to 26, but we're going to be able to do almost 300 megs of solar for 17.9 cents. And we actually run the cost of the solar farms through the FAC, through the LEAC, because it has to do with the amount of oil we're using or not using. So, and the FAC is 2/3 of your bill, just like in Guam. So, if you're going to attack costs, you need to attack the 2/3 a lot more than you can do the 1/3. The base rate here hasn't gone up since 2013. Same in Guam. They do a lot with the base rate. That's what pays the salaries and does what CIPs it can do. But we all know the battle right now is to reduce our fuel consumption, because that's the biggest part of the bill. That's the most painful part of the bill. And renewables, particularly solar, given where we're located, offers the greatest opportunity. I loved your story with Kauai. I'm a big fan of Kauai, but I have to, you'll love this story too, because we all experience it. Rainy season, rains for 7, 10, 12 days, right? Or a typhoon, right? Well, Kauai got to 100%, but when they finally had a typhoon, because they don't have typhoons in Hawaii like we do here, right? When they finally got to it, they couldn't make enough solar because it was cloud covered for a week. They turned on the generator failed, right? So they had some load shedding. We're an isolated grid. Los Angeles can take wind from Nebraska. The national grid sends it to LA, so they can do that. We can't run extension cords. You can't run it to Guam. We can't run it to you, So we're going to always have to have extra capacity, redundancy, in order to take a system offline, a generator offline to repair it like you should. You have enough additional capacity to keep the lights on, and then you rotate the maintenance, and so we're always going to have a little more capacity, because we can't run an extension cord to anywhere else, right? And that's where renewables really can play an excellent role. And it's a combination of some generator that's still going to burn some carbon in an isolated grid until nuclear or batteries or some of these other technologies, get to be like this, right? Our children and grandchildren are going to have a lot cheaper power, I believe. And this is the beginning of it, right? What we're presenting to you, it's going to get even better. But I'm confident that the steps that the team has put together, GHD is also a consultant for GPA. We're all reaching the same conclusions, and now our job is to get beyond the studies and start to implement them. And in fairness to Kevin and Betty, I mean, you all know the challenge of hiring good management to come and want to work here. And we had a couple of fish on the line, and some of them were really good, but at the last minute, for whatever reasons, they chose not to. And then we kept looking around and said, we got 2 dedicated people that are qualified. US EPA said they're qualified for the consent decree, and so we're giving them a shot at it. And I think I'm optimistic. Of course, I'm always an optimistic person. Otherwise, I'm like you folks. You wouldn't be in public service, right? You think we can make it better, right? Just like I do. So, but I like what we're seeing. Now we just got to get on with implementing it, and we have 2 people to yell at now, right? Formally, right? And a great team of professionals there. The engineers, they see it. GHD sees it. I see it. We can do it. We just need your help. I don't want to stray too far off the topic, but I don't get to visit you that often. Just allow you have been elected, and you have nominated and confirmed people to be on the CUC and the PUC. And even though that has happened in the past, perhaps one reason 2016 never happened was those 2 institutions were never allowed to, I would say, mature, where they could make decisions with subject matter experts, engineers, and make them for, I would say, prudent business reasons rather than sometimes political reasons, right? And I think there's a wonderful piece of legislation being developed now and about what's in the FAQ, and we're already dealing with that. We're dealing with it. We're asking Betty and Kevin, explain to us what are all these other things in the FAQ, because none of them are in the FAQ in Guam, right? But I know there's a piece of legislation that wants to deal with it here. And I had to chuckle when I read the preamble, because the first thing it complained about was political interference for the last 20 years. I'm going, well, let the processes mature. I was on Guam's PUC first in 1988. It is now 34 years old. The CCU, the elected CCU, is 22 years old. And whether you elect them or appoint them, that's your call. We've happened to be okay so far with an elected board, better than an appointed board, but I'm not convinced that's necessary magic. Just put good people on the board, but let them do their work, right? And you have an independent PUC, and they're supposed to be independent, because sometimes 1 + 1 is 2. Now, politically, we wish it was 1.5, or we wish, if it's a revenue, we want it to be 3, but sometimes it is what it is. And you want that independent judgment to be presented as facts to you, the ultimate decision makers, and let them do it. But so that's a long-winded answer. Of course, as a former senator, I'm guilty of what you're all guilty of. But I'm very proud to be part of this board. I think if you will allow the team to continue to do what it's doing, we're going to produce better results for our people here and our children to come. And 2030, that's tomorrow, right? I mean, we just got to get this stuff built and in the ground. There's on the water side, I know we're not talking about water, but there's a lot of grant money. There's a lot going on at CUC that I think will benefit the CNMI.
Senator, sorry to interject, but I'm looking at the time. And that's the reason why this committee is having this informational hearing, because the more consistency in feeding information to the public, especially as critical and as important as the utilities, as what you're saying earlier, we're going to get to the.
Yeah.
But
well, we briefed the governor, and we wanted to brief you, and next thing you know, you called the hearing. So I said, perfect. So, we're grateful for that.
Thank you for your comments and your guidance, and we certainly appreciate your guidance also to this side of the Mariana Islands.
Yeah, we can do it.
So, Senator Magofnia, did you wanted to ask a question? No?
I
Okay.
just wanted to clarify
met
because
before.
I saw him.
No,
nodding his head.
this is good. I was
Okay.
nodding my head on the green, shaking my head on the red,
Oh,
and the
okay.
yellows are, well, we'll
That's
see.
what
I
you
like
meant.
that.
Okay.
That's why I pointed that first. So
Yeah, no, you got the color scheme correct. You got the color scheme. We like green, we don't like red. Yellow, we'll think about it.
I want to recognize Vice Chair Senator Calvo.
Thank you, Senator Sanchez, for that simplified explanation, and moving forward for our Commonwealth as well. The one thing too that I'm pretty sure the people are inquiring about is if the implementation of the IRP is in place, do we expect the removal of the FAT, fuel adjustment charge, at any time or point in time to the consumers?
I mean, we blend conventional with renewable, and we still have a LEAC. And,
Okay,
and,
you
and we
still-
run the LEAC through. We run the solar contracts through the LEAC because they affect the amount of fuel we consume, and the LEAC pays for fuel. So one lesson learned would be with the PUC is we would recommend that once we get the bids in, that how do you pay for the bid? If it's saving you fuel, then let's put that in the FAC, right? I think the other, unfortunately, the other lost opportunity that we had was the tax credits that were issued by the federal government over the last 20 years that President Trump now sounding like he wants to get rid of. The bids that we just awarded all got this last tax credit. So the pricing may be a little bit more challenging, but I still think it'll be cheaper than relying on oil for the rest of our lives. Because once you get the solar array in there, we'll go from 17.9 cents now. I think 25 years from now, which is the life of these agreements, Senator, it goes up to like 19 cents. So over 20 years, it'll go up a little bit, but it only goes up a couple of pennies. And the private sector prices that into their bid. They take the risk. They're the ones that front the money, right? Because Mr. Watson will talk about the possibility of borrowing the money ourselves from the Department of Energy if it's available. But the PPPs, the private-public partnership, they build the solar farm in Mangilao. We pay them over 25 years for the energy that we consume. I was teasing myself 20 years ago, but I was telling GPA, 20 years later, we may never run any generation. We may just buy energy. And PPPs is just that. You're just buying the energy. We don't need to make cars in the islands. We'll buy cars from Toyota and the car dealers, right? And we don't have to make energy. We can just buy it from people that are very good at making energy, making repairs, fixing parts. Let them find the general manager. Let them deal with the labor. Let them deal with you export all the risk. You outsource all of that. They'll charge you for it, but it may produce, and it has proven for us to produce much more reliable results. A great example: Mangilao lost 2% of its solar panels during Marwar. First typhoon in 20 plus years. One big question: how would the solar farms do when you finally get a typhoon? Rooftop and utility scale solar did excellent. 98, 99%, few panels. And then they were back on, they were at 100% within 3 weeks. Why? Because they get paid for the energy and they want to sell us all that energy, right? As fast as they can. They want to manufacture a part to get it back online as fast as they can. And they have access to expertise that we don't always have here in the islands. It's harder. So we're leaning PPP. That would be a green one, right? And hopefully we can find the right partners. There are people in Guam always asking, when are these bids coming out, right? So there are people. They do worry about getting paid. So we're going to need some help on making sure that the CUC is paid for services, right? Because think of it this way, there's about 30, take away the penalties and the fines and all that, but $30-40 million that if that was put into the system, that would benefit everybody, right? So the leadership of Guam figured out a way to have the Guam Memorial Hospital pay its power and its water bill, right, on their side, without asking the ratepayers of GPA or GWA to pay the hospital's bills, right? So that's a challenge that you've all volunteered for, and I know you can solve it. But to the degree you can stabilize the way the government pays its utility bills, that helps everybody, and then we can put the money into the green and not into the red.
I didn't realize the government wasn't paying their power bill.
26 since at least before 2016, because some of those receivables are pretty old.
Thank
But-
you, Senator Sanchez. Very, very well explained. I was just doing the comparison, how you said 17.9 cents that you guys, the conversion. When they do transition, when that happened in Guam, did did it automatically go, you got that rate at 17, or was there a transition, like a peak and then it had to settle down? How was that transition?
So
Period.
Excellent question, Senator. So, we climbed up our learning curve because our first solar farm was in 2014, right? And that had no battery. So we ended up buying a battery 3 or 4 years later because we realized you got to have a battery in an island with partly cloudy skies, right? So we put in a battery, but all the bids now include batteries for shifting. The technology has matured to the point where no batteries being made today are only for just dealing with intermittency, cloud cover, up and down. They now store energy so that when you get the energy, you may not always need it at that time, right? When demand, like at noon right now, demand is down, right? People are not using as much power, but when they go home, they need it. That's when you dispatch the cheaper energy. But we learned that 17.9 cents was what our team came up with, that said with the tax credits that were available then, and from our experience and having issued a few bids, right? We said, who's interested in providing solar energy to Guam at 17.9? And we were oversubscribed. We thought we'd get 100 megawatts. We got 300 megawatts. So again, the tax credit was very beneficial, right? And we got it, and we've awarded all. I think just one provider is having trouble. They don't build, we don't buy, right? Everyone else is now in construction, right? Or is about to go into construction, right? So that price kind of was determined from our experience. And in fact, I was teasing ourselves. We had so many bidders at 17.9. I said, man, we should have gone to 17.3 or 7, right? Because we had a lot of people saying, oh, I can make a nickel at 17.9. So we had all those bids in, but it's healthy there. They do worry about getting paid, the bidders that want to bid here, but we can overcome that. Now I'm telling them, don't worry about that, bid, right? So we're ready to follow the same lessons learned and maybe do better, right? Because we've learned some lessons, but it's there. Right? We're on the precipice. The GHD study confirms it. Now Kevin and Betty got to deliver it, and we got to help them, force them to do that.
Thank you so much, Senator Sanchez and team. I yield, Chair. Thank you.
Then thank you, Senator Calvo. Any other member before we proceed to item 2? All right. So let's transition into item 2. I know the clock is ticking to noon, and I just wanted to advise everyone in here that we're going to take a break at 12 noon, and we'll rise back at 1 o'clock so that we can have some time to, do what we need to do in our normal business day, and during government hours or during our time in the day. Sorry. So whoever is going to do the presentation for item 2 will move on to that. Thank you, Mr. Tenorio, for your presentation. This is very good, and I'm sure the community is very much appreciative of what you had. And I continue to ask that, I don't know what the contract looks like for you with CUC, but the more information presented to the public, the better they can understand what you and as a contractor and your client is trying to do. No, thank you. So, Chair, I yield to whoever is going to cover item 2.
Thank you. And could we have the next PowerPoint on the screen?
Okay, we're going to take a short recess.
Okay.
I think yours projection project your slide is up and running. Go ahead.
Thank you, senators and chair and distinguished guests. It's our pleasure to be here, and we are excited about the direction we're moving forward. Today, we'll be discussing the CUC Power Projects Update, which consists of the following topics: the power generation status for Saipan, Tinian, and Rota. We will provide a brief overview of the fuel adjustment charge trend from January 2020 to December 2024. Renewable energy project status, which was just presented, the draft integrated resource plan, and the 20 megawatt solar design with battery storage, and discussion of procurement of energy resource public law 17-34, which amends public law 16-17. The public law provides the types of contracts allowed for the procurement contracts for diesel generation and renewable energy sources through a private sector assistance agreement, or PSAA. We will also discuss the pros and cons of each PSAA. We will also discuss the recommendations for the next steps for the CUC energy resources based on the public law. Additionally, we will discuss other related topics that include the cost of service study, net metering policy revisions update, and the diesel engine number 4 replacement update, power transmission and distribution projects update, hazard mitigation projects for Saipan, Tinian, and Rota, and the CDBG-DR project, which is the Tinian underground project to critical loads, and the U.S. Department of Energy grid resiliency grant projects. And finally, we'll have time for the discussion and then questions and answers. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, Mr. Watson. And
Yeah.
I think, is there any way we can blow that up? It's, yeah. I mean, I'm just concerned that the viewing probably may not be able to zone in. But if that's the best, that's fine. Just go ahead.
Okay, this slide provides a summary of the current available generation capacity for the Saipan, Tinian, and Rota power generation facilities. Design generation capacity is defined as the total megawatt available if all of the diesel engines were running as the nameplate data and there were no issues or repairs to the units. And that's not the case with our system. We have several that are down and in need of repair or replacement. The derated generation capacity is defined as the total megawatt currently available and shows the actual amount of generation capacity that is reliable for export to the CUC power grid. Therefore, the available capacity is equal to the derated generation capacity. However, for Saipan, we have the temporary generation contractor providing a minimum of 12 megawatt. Currently, that is Aggreko. The overall conditions of the plants are determined based on the ability for CUC to meet the peak demand should one of the largest units were to go offline to prevent a power outage. Saipan power generation condition is at a critical status, while Tinian and Rota remain at a relatively better condition as they are able to meet the peak demand. Next slide. Okay, here we see the fuel adjustment charge. That's a trend from January 2020 to December 2024. The lowest fuel adjustment charge rate was in June 2020 at roughly 8 cents. The highest fuel adjustment charge rate was in June 2022 at roughly 43 cents. And the current rate as of February 2025 is roughly 23 cents. Next slide, please. Renewable energy projects. This slide provides the details of the status of the integrated resource plan, which is being updated by the CUC consultant, GHD, who just presented the IRP. The key dates for upcoming events were, we held an external stakeholders workshop on January 22nd, 2025. And the following day, on January 23rd, 2025, they presented to the CUC Board of Directors an abbreviated version of that, which was what you saw this morning. During the one that was presented to the board, we had about 40 participants, which included PSS, DPL, CHCC, CPUC, BECQ, Chamber of Commerce, and the House PUTC chairman. The CUC Board of Directors Stakeholders Workshop is to be determined yet, but anticipated to be in early to mid-March of 2025. Next slide, please. The status for the 20 megawatt solar design project is, the design project is presently about 40% complete with the survey work completed. The project is anticipated to be completed in April of 2025. The properties for the proposed sites are Ascono Solar Farm has been designated to CUC. However, CUC is still working with the Department of Public Lands for the designation for the site in the Nafton area of Saipan. This this is just as a preliminary design that once it will prepare us to go out for an IPP, private partnership, public-private partnership, and they will do the design for construction along with the construction and enter into a 25-year agreement with CUC for similar to what Guam model has done, except we will be providing the property. The next slide, please. The procurement of energy resources. Okay, this slide provides a summary of the types of contracts CUC is capable of awarding for different types of energy resource RFPs and IFBs through Public Law 14-34, along with the pros and cons of each contract type. The biggest takeaway from the slide is that for any type of renewable energy resource procurement, CUC will have to issue an RFP, while for any new diesel generation, CUC will have to issue an IFB, or invitation for bids. And this follows the public law. The IPP contract was recommended to the CUC Board of Directors for the new diesel generation for all three islands. I'd like to add here that we are presently developing an RFP for renewables as identified in our integrated resource plan. I'll cover that more later. We are also in the process of developing an IFB simultaneously for the diesel generation for a public-private partnership. Each of these would encompass a 25-year agreement. Next slide, please. This slide shows the recommended next steps for continuing forward to incorporate an integrated renewable energy and update our existing power generation facilities. The total estimated cost is 700 million for all three islands. Of course, we don't have $700 million on hand to make this investment. So that's why we're looking at the public-private partnerships for where the outside source would provide the funding. An alternative to that will be a Department of Energy line of credit. I think that possibly could be on hold right now, as many of the grants are, until the new administration under Trump is realize on which direction he wants to go, and with the grants as well as Department of Energy funding. If we are capable of getting the funding, it could help keep the cost down for the diesel power generations, because that would be a line of credit would mean we could purchase the new engines as they're needed, and the interest would only be on that amount drawn down. So if we were to get a $700 million line of credit, that doesn't mean we would start paying interest on that. One engine possibly could be 3.5 million or 6 million. So then we would start paying a low interest rate over the next 30 years. And that's where I mentioned our plan to help smooth out the impact to the ratepayers. And these are also being analyzed through our cost of service study now, the impact by which direction we go. And the other would be 100% investment by the private entity who would have the funding. As Simon pointed out, there are vendors in South Korea that have, the funding and know-how to design, build, and operate a solar facility. So we plan on getting those the RFP and the IFB out within the next few months. Staff's presently working on it, and we are getting assistance from NREL to provide the technical expertise on once we write the IFP and RFP, they will review it and add their suggestions and recommendations to make sure that we've included everything in it necessary to get a really good system in place that will help control the cost of the energy going forward. And I'd like to add that on the FAC or the fuel charge, that any solar we bring online will help reduce that number, since that will reduce the amount of fuel needed for the diesel engines. The reason we're going out for an IFB on the diesel engines is because our engines are 30 to 50 years old. We'd overhauled an engine in Guam. I mean, not Guam, but Rota. And during the commissioning it was an older engine, and we rebuilt it. It caught fire. So now we have to rebuild it again, the parts that were damaged in the fire. That just happened in the last couple of weeks. So we're down to one engine that's operating and one that is in reserve or standby if the other one would fail. But we are analyzing and assessing what parts need to be ordered and going forward. At the power plant 1 here in Saipan, we have a is that 8.3? 8.7 megawatt generator, a new one under commissioning now. It's going online by the end of this month or 1st of March. They've already ramped up to 100% and going through the testing phases now. The Greco, which provides 12 megawatts power, that's a lease power. Their contract ends this May, and it can't be renewed. So we are ready to put out an IFB for 12 megawatt power, either for Greco to bid or one of their competitors to bid, and that will have to be brought online by May. So it will be running. It will be in an alternative place that the present lease power generators are, because we have to keep that power online so we don't have to shed power. And then whoever gets it, whether it be a Greco or their competitor, will have that one ready to go online at the end of the Greco contract in May. Another thing I'd like to point out is the 700 million, if we were to get a line of credit, that would take legislation approval. So we would come back and ask you to grant CUC approval to enter into a loan, a 30-year line of credit loan. And so, if we would go that route, if we are still planning on meeting with Department of Energy experts and the loan department, and they've asked us to come up with a list of projects and numbers. They were encouraging us to go this route. At the time, they had a very large basket or fund of available, that they indicated that there hadn't been that many agencies tapping into those available funds, and that could fund new diesel engines that are more efficient and burns less fuel. So all of that can help lower the fuel adjustment charge. If we can get new engines and burn more efficiency and are more reliable to run for the next 10 to 30 years, we would stabilize the rates, or possibly, especially for the FAC, to bring that portion of the bill down. Next slide, please. The CUC power system goals. This slide indicates the CUC goals and action items for fiscal 24-25, which includes completing the IRP, updating the CUC net metering policy. And I'd like to point out that the net metering policy, we have contracted with autonomous.com, who is presently undertaking studying our existing net metering policy and are drafting a proposed new policy for net metering that will benefit all of our customers, whether they have solar on their roofs or not solar on their roofs, because this needs to be a win-win for all customers, not just those that can afford to put solar panels on their roof or have the structural integrity of their house that would support solar power panels on their roof. The development of the CUC Energy Master Plan, that is being done under a grant through Department of Defense. The CNMI central government got a grant for, I believe it's a $4.3 million to do not just an energy master plan, but it's an energy master plan, water master plan, wastewater master plan, and a telecommunications master plan, all in one. They will be collaborating with our existing consultants, such as GHD and autonomous.com, so that they don't redo something that's already been done. So they would get that information from them in a collaborative method and get us an ideal plan to go forward. This will also help when we go to the Department of Energy with our project list. And one of the statements that Department of Defense stated that this master plan for the energy grid will give them a roadmap of how they can help support us through future grants and funding. That master plan will be being reviewed by a review panel at the first week or second week of March. The RFP's already gone out and bids come in. So the panel is being put together now to review and rank the bidding process. So replacement of the new diesel engines in an effort to reduce GHG emissions. So that replacing these with the new diesel engines, that's why Department of Energy are willing to give us a loan, because it will help on the emissions for pollution control. And we're also identify possible funding for an anaerobic digestion study that for the wastewater treatment plant. That we haven't touched on much, but that is energy. And that is a process of converting the wastewater sludge through an anaerobic digestion process. That process produces methane gas, and that methane gas can be converted to energy through energy cells. The study is necessary to see if our wastewater load at our two treatment plants, is it enough to make it economically feasible? FEMA thinks it is. FEMA has encouraged us to pursue this and has even suggested that they would be able to provide FEMA grant funding to fund the process. Right now, the sludge is treated through an aerobic process, which uses energy with electric blowers. So if you have an anaerobic process, right off the bat, you reduce your electrical consumption at your wastewater plants, because you could take the power, or the blowers reduce the necessary blower capacity in the treatment process, because it will be an anaerobic process for the digested sludge through the anaerobic. Okay, next slide. So as mentioned earlier, CUC has other energy-related projects, such as the cost of service study, expected to be completed 90 days after the notice to proceed. The notice to proceed was about 2 months ago, so we're looking at another 30 days to have that done. Right now, we're in the final plans on getting their requested information and data, and which includes our budget for energy, water, and wastewater to them, so they can put a 10-year plan together, and the cost of service study will encompass that 10-year plan. And the net metering, net billing policy update is also to be completed 90 days after the notice to proceed. And this was also issued to economist.com. With the economist.com, we are in the process right now for doing a reconciliation on the fuel adjustment charge. They gave us a proposal for a task order that will reconcile it back to from 2014 to present. And then going forward, it will be done every 6 months. They also have with CPUC a proposal to do the reconciliation on a monthly basis. So that change in that would have to be approved and recommended by CPUC. So that's still to be decided, or we may keep the 6 months. One of the pros of having a 6 month and that doesn't get changed monthly is for our customers, they can budget their expenditures over a 6 month period. They will know what it's going to cost. And then at the end of that 6 months, when it's reconciled, then that number will either get adjusted up or down. So again, then they can budget for the next 6 months. They would know what their charge is going to be, instead of the present way where it can change. So, and that's also follows a model that Guam uses. And I've spoken to Simon on numerous occasions to get information about, how to model and make improvements here for CUC and CNMI to learn, lessons learned, not just their successes, but also their failures. Because, they've had some bumps in the road too, and we can learn from that. So even the 60 megawatt solar farm in Guam that was put in 5 to 10 years ago, the technology's improved, so we will be able to take advantage of those improvements in technology. And the other item is diesel engine number 4 replacement. It's currently in the endurance testing phase and near completion. And that's what I mentioned earlier. And that shows the picture of that in this slide. So next slide, please. And this shows the alternative options. And I had touched on this. This slide provides an alternative option to the privatization of power generation for the CNMI. To replace all the diesel engines, we are looking at an estimate of $432 million. And, that's something that we wouldn't have to do all at once, but would be phased in over time and to help keep the cost down. And this may be possible through the U.S. Department of Energy Loan Program Office. And as I mentioned earlier, if we take this route, we will need to seek legislation in order to enter into any loan. Next slide, please. So we've discussed the CUC power generation and renewable energy projects. Now we move to the power transmission and distribution project updates. The first projects are hazard mitigation grant program projects for Saipan, Tinian, and Rota. These are concrete power pole projects. CUC has submitted the applications to move on the second phases for construction for Tinian and Rota. Additionally, CUC has also submitted the phase 1 application for the Saipan concrete power poles project design. CUC is near the completion of the CUC to CHCC, the hospital underground power distribution design phase. And that's scheduled for completion in March 15th, 2025. Additionally, CUC has received funding for the Tinian underground power distribution to critical loads, and this is currently under the procurement of the CDBG-DR program. Next slide, please. And lastly, CUC received an award of $3.396 million from Department of Energy for grid resiliency. CUC received notification from the funding agency that the funds may be affected, however. We are waiting for more guidance from the DOE prior to submitting the proposed list of projects to help improve CUC's grid. We are very hopeful that this will be allowed to go forward. And we have the listed there of our projects. Our number one is Estata for the power plants, $1 million. Distribution automation, $950,000. High voltage underground design power plant number 1 to Chalantia substation at $800,000. A substation transformer assessment, PM at $250,000. Vegetation clearing at $150,000, and personnel technical assistance at $168,000, and a power system improvement project of $178,000. This has a matching of 1/3, so CUC will have to come up with just under or right at $1 million. But so on the state of project, for instance, we would come up with $333,000 to supplement the 1 million from the grant. Next slide, please. So now we open for questions, and I have Yvonne here, who is our renewable energy engineer, and she knows a lot more about renewable energy than I ever helped to know. But so I will have her answer many questions that you may have.
Thank you, Director Watson. And before I think I mentioned earlier that we're gonna thank you for doing the presentation. And I was kind of wondering where Chalanquilla is. Nah, I was just. I'm surprised the chair didn't tell you how to pronounce Kiza.
I apologize. I struggle with pronouncing some of these names and locations.
Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier that we're going to take a break, and we're going to make good of that. We're going to take a break for an hour, and we'll be back at 1:30, which we're going to present the Q&A from the members. So please come back at 1:30, and then we'll resume back in on item number 2. Thank you very much. We are now on recess.